I'm going to tell a story tonight, and I love this feeling like you're all circled around in the living room, listening to a story. And I hope that our wide Sangha can kind of feel like they're hunkering down with us for our storytelling. So my name is Monshin, Nannette, Overley, and I get the privilege to hang out here with our residents and the Roshi and the Noah and Kozan and all of us who are here just being able to practice. And before I really get started, we'll chant the verse before the Dharma talk.
The Dharma
is vast and subtle. We now have a chance to hear it, study it, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning. The Dharma is vast and subtle. We now have a chance to hear it, study it, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning. The Dharma is vast and subtle. We now have a chance to hear it, study it, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning. So I am going to read a story, and it's kind of a long story, which is sometimes considered bad form in a Dharma talk to read a long story, but you can trust me that the teachings of this story are much more profound than anything I'll have to say about it afterward. And we always have a title for our talks, so I sent Natalie this title for the website that said Stone Catchers. And then a couple weeks later, I said, maybe we should add something because it's a little too enigmatic. So the title of my talk tonight is Stone Catchers, Tenderness on the Path of Social Engagement. And we are in the midst of our first year of a socially engaged Buddhist training. And we are also on the cusp of our spring practice period study of the bodhisattva way. And so this talk really, really speaks to this word, this ideal of the bodhisattva, and you know what we're really talking about and how we bring that into our lives in a way that means something. The story is from a book called Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, and some of you will know this book and perhaps some of you won't, but Brian Stevenson is an American lawyer who's a social justice activist, and he founded the Equal Justice Initiative, and his work is really does a lot of work in prison reform, people who are sentenced to death row, and particularly did a lot of work for juveniles who as children, as minors, were sentenced to life in prison. But this isn't not a story about Brian Stevenson. This is a story of a woman who interestingly and intriguingly, is left unnamed, like a lot of our Buddhist women ancestors whose names are left unsaid. And it's not a Zen story, but it's a bodhisattva story. And this bodhisattva ideal, there are many definitions, but basically is one who commits one's life to put others before oneself, to work with all the selfishness that in time it could settle down and clear our way to seeing and serving others. So the bodhisattva path is an effort to liberate all beings, and in fact, in the tradition, to liberate all beings before oneself. And because this woman remains unnamed, and I need to refer to her, and as we share thoughts about her, I am going to call her the Stonecatcher Bodhisattva. And this image of stone catching was so intriguing to me because we have our classic image of Avalokiteshvara with her, 100 arms with an eye on each one, and I could just have this image of stone catching, of this movement of Avalokiteshvara as she naturally stands between hatred and others, naturally hears the cries of the world. And this imagery is from the Christian parable of casting stones, and Jesus teaching and intervening as people were casting stones, saying, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." Okay. I want to say get comfortable because it's a story, but I see all these beautiful upright bodhisattvas in front of me, so get comfortable in an upright way, and I'll begin my story. So this story takes place in the hallways of the courthouse after a very important case that Brian Stevenson has just won. And he's just won freedom for two men who are, I think, at least in their I think they're in their 70s, who were sent to prison as juveniles and sentenced to life in prison. So he's walking the hallways, waiting for the paperwork to be done, exhausted from the trial, also exuberant from the trial. And he says, an older black woman sat on the marble steps in the massive courthouse hallway. She looked tired and wore what my sister and I used to call a church meeting hat. She had smooth, dark skin, and I recognized her as someone who had been in the courtroom when Mr. Carter was resentenced. In fact, I thought I'd seen her each time I had come to the courthouse in New Orleans. I assumed she was related or connected to one of the clients, although I didn't remember the other family members ever mentioning her. I must have been staring because she saw me looking and waved at me, gesturing for me to come over to her. When I walked over, she smiled at me. I'm tired and I'm not going to get up, so you're going to have to lean over for me to give you a big hug. She had a sweet voice that crackled. I smiled back at her. Well, yes, ma'am. I love hugs. Thank you. She wrapped her arms around my neck. Sit. I want to talk to you, she said. I sat down beside her on the steps. I've seen you several times. Are you related to Mr. Carson or Mr. Carter? I asked. No, I'm not related to nobody here. Not that I know of, anyway. She had a kind smile, and she looked at me intensely. I just come here to help people. This is a place full of pain, so people need plenty of help around here. Well, that's really kind of you. No, it's just what I'm supposed to do, so I do it. It's what I'm supposed to do, so I do it. She looked away before locking eyes with me again. My 16-year-old grandson was murdered 15 years ago, she said, and I loved that boy more than life itself. I wasn't expecting that response and was instantly sobered. The woman grabbed my hand. I grieved and grieved and grieved. I asked the Lord why he let someone take my child like that. He was killed by some other boys. I came to this courtroom for the first time for their trials and sat in there and cried every day for nearly 2 weeks. None of it made any sense. Those boys were found guilty for killing my grandson, and the judge sent them away to prison forever. I thought it would make me feel better, but actually, it made me feel worse. She continued, I sat in the courtroom after they were sentenced and just cried and cried. A lady came over to me and gave me a hug and let me lean on her. She asked me if the boys who got sentenced were my children, and I told her no. I told her the boy they killed was my child. She hesitated. I think she sat with me for almost 2 hours. For well over an hour, neither one of us say a word. It felt good to finally have someone to lean on at this trial. And I've never forgotten that woman. I don't know who she was, but she made a difference. I'm so sorry about your grandson, I murmured. It was all I could think to say. Well, you never fully recover, but you carry on. You carry on. I didn't know what to do with myself after those trials. So about a year later, I started coming down here. I really don't know why. I guess I just felt like maybe I could be someone, that somebody hurting could lean on. She looped her arm with mine. I smiled at her. That's really wonderful. It has been wonderful. It has been wonderful. What's your name again? It's Brian. It has been wonderful, Brian. When I first came, I'd look for people who had lost someone to murder or some violent crime. But then it got to the point where some of the ones grieving the most were the ones whose children or parents were on trial. So I just started letting anybody lean on me who needed it. All these young children being sent to prison forever. All this grief and violence. Those judges throwing people away like they're not even human. People shooting each other, hurting each other like they don't care. I don't know. It's a lot of pain. I decided that I was supposed to be here to catch some of the stones. I decided I was supposed to be here to catch some of the stones people cast at each other. So I want to really look at what happened for this woman to be able to take the pain of losing her grandchild and transform it into this beautiful bodhisattva action. Like, what does it take to do that? And what do we do with our individual and collective suffering? And how do we do something different in a culture that's so ready to find fault, to blame and shame and point fingers, to express rage and jump to a verdict without even attempting to discover the truth? And this woman did something different with her suffering and pain and anger. In our Buddhist teachings, we talk about the qualities we need to cultivate, and these are the paramitas of generosity. You can see that in her. Ethical conduct, patience, joyful effort, meditation, and wisdom. And this basic foundational bodhisattva activity of not turning away from suffering of the world, which is what we saw her do. I just wanted to repeat these words because they resonated so much to me with this story that are from the Gate of Sweet Nectar, which is a liturgy that we do once a month. And I see her in these words as well. Calling all you hungry spirits everywhere through endless time, calling all you hungry hearts, all the lost and left behind, gather round and share this meal, your joy and sorrow. I make it mine. So I want to go through it, and as best as we can in our imagination anyway, attend closely to each step of her journey. And what I'm hoping is that it's an inspiring story, but I think we need to do more than just be inspired. I think we need to ask what it will take for us to follow the bodhisattva path. What will it take to us to really show up to our vows? So questions like, where do we stop? Where do we turn away because it's too much? What hungry spirits are we not willing to invite into our lives? So what I see that she did first is that she opened her heart to her own suffering, that loss. She said she grieved and she grieved and she grieved. And she came to the courtroom and cried every day. And I thought, about the pain right now in our world, and if we're willing to grieve it. Are we grieving for those killed in Atlanta? Are we grieving for the hate that drove them to be able to kill? Are we really being penetrated? Are we grieving for the loss of those in the Boulder shootings? And this is just what's close in. We have a world of suffering. And I think the first step for us is just to open to it, and know that we have back strong enough to open our hearts to it. And then our bodhisattva stonecatcher, she let that pain connect her to others. So, she said that she thought that guilty verdict for the boys who killed her grandson would make her feel better, but it made her feel worse. And so when she came to the courtroom, she opened her heart to the suffering of all of those who were part of that systemic violence, to the ones who pulled the trigger, to their parents, and as well as to the families of those who were killed. She connected to them as human beings who were suffering. And then there's also the layer of the other unnamed woman who had comforted her. All these acts that ripple out. The other thing that moves me is that she so clearly talks about not knowing what to do. For a year she was at home grieving. And then she just showed up. She said, I didn't know what to do with myself after those trials. So about a year later, I just started coming down here. I don't really know why. I guess I just felt like maybe I could be someone, that somebody could lean on. It's like, I can get so easily overwhelmed and look in all directions and like, okay, where can I serve? And how can I show up for the immigrants that I care about so much and worked with for so many years who are coming to our country. And, she didn't know, but she found her way to meet suffering. But first she just showed up at the courtroom. So for you, what would that look like? What's there for you and for us that we're kind of just turning away from? And where might we show up, even not knowing how we can help, even not knowing what we can do? So just to reiterate, this is a teaching story. And I'm hoping that it kind of can, enter you the way it did me and stay with you and help you ask these questions. It's so interesting. She's almost like, being this figure that even doesn't have a name, it's almost to me like this archetypical figure that we can just kind of carry with us. And yet, she was a woman who showed up and gave tenderness to people, really. So I want to say a little bit about another way, besides the paramitas, to see her action as a bodhisattva, by referring to Dogen's fascicle about the 4 embracing actions of a bodhisattva. And those are giving, kind speech, beneficial action, and then sharing the same aim or identity action. And I hadn't really seen this reference before, but I want to repeat it because I think it's quite beautiful. These 4 actions actually are a list that date all the way back to the Pali Canon. And there's a sutta called the Sangaha Sutta that says, these are the 4 grounds for bonds of fellowship: giving, kind words, beneficial help, and consistency in the face of events, in line with what's appropriate in each case. Each case, these bonds of fellowship function in the world like the linchpin in a moving cart. And there's something else besides these actions in that fascicle that I think is really important also to look at in the context of our desire to serve and our giving and our, turning towards suffering, because it sounds so grim. But if you think of how it actually served this woman in her life to turn towards suffering, to show up so that she could actually meet people and connect with people and bear witness, I would say it helped her get her life back. So what Dogen says is, he actually questions the view of bodhisattva activity as primarily benefiting others by saying this: foolish people think that if they help others first, their own benefit will be lost. But this is not so. Beneficial action is an act of oneness, benefiting self and others together. So we have this work to do, which is hard. And I can only imagine what it was like for our Stonecatcher Bodhisattva to go from her grief to her joy in meeting others. And one of the things we have to do is work with anger. So there's an energy of anger that rouses us and motivates us when we see an injustice, like the injustice that she was witnessing. And our work is to transform it into a passion that is caring, the fierceness of catching stones, and the tenderness of coming alongside. She said, those judges throwing people away like they're not even human, people shooting each other like they don't care, I don't know, it's a lot of pain. I decided that I was supposed to be here to catch some of those stones people cast at each other. And this is really a bearing witness that is taking complete responsibility, knowing that we're implicated no matter what, that we're responsible. And it's the critical difference between being a bystander or a spectator and a witness. Because even though it's difficult and we have to step out, when we're bearing witness, we gain empathy, compassion, and a kind of a centeredness and empowerment that comes from facing the truth, from looking out at things as they are. And there's also a connection, when we bear witness in this way, a breaking down of the separation between self and other. Whereas when we turn away because we're overwhelmed, because we feel helpless, there's a sense of being cut off from others. So in these ways we benefit, and we also benefit others just by letting them know that they're not alone in their suffering, that they're witnessed. And then I thought about not only the people who were witnessing, but we're reading a story, and yet we also are benefiting from witnessing this act of caring, so that we also perceive the world kind of as a more hopeful place, a more workable place. I totally meant to ask you for the clock, Wendy. You want to give me a time check?
6:17. Do you want it?
6:17? I think I'm fine. Thank you. And another thing that came to me contemplating this imagery of stone catching is, she says several times, it hurts, it hurts to catch those stones, to put oneself in the way of harm sometimes, and to turn towards suffering. We put ourselves in the way and catch the stones, and then we open our hands, and we don't carry them, and we don't put them in our backpack, and we don't haul them around. And that's, I think, one of the secrets of resiliency in this work of showing up for others, in this work that we call bodhisattva activity. So after my time check, I wasn't sure I'd have time to bring this in, but there's a very delightful article that Roshi Enkyo wrote called "Bodhisattvas Have More Fun." So how can you not want to read an article like that, right? But what she talks about really, when she talks about having fun, is not being frozen in an attitude about the way things are, is actually, rather than fixing on an agenda and tightening around our work, this open, creative, fresh attitude that we can bring. Looking for imaginative ways to meet the suffering of the world and appreciating the preciousness of our lives. She says, we don't have to agonize about how can I serve, how can I make a difference. Instead, we can pick up whatever tool is at hand. Oh, it's a cup. Oh, it's a hammer. And there's been some beautiful talks given actually at Upaya by Roshi, by John Paul Lederach, about imagination and the imagination that's needed, both to recognize that we're part of the problem and to recognize that we can creatively be part of the solution. So witnesses, bystanders are stuck people, but witnesses are activated people. And we start right where we are. I wanted to share this beautiful quote by Greta Thunberg. Once we start to act, hope is everywhere. So instead of looking for hope, look for action. Then and only then, hope will come. So I want to go back to the title I chose from my talk and bring in this word tenderness, because living these vows isn't comfortable, and we fall on our faces, and we have to challenge our identity, actually. We have to see where we're stuck, where we're clinging. And so tenderness toward ourselves, patience with ourselves is also really necessary. John Paul Lederach, in his recent talk, used the phrase that we have to be tender in our tenacity. So balancing our courage and our tenderness toward ourselves is kind of the sweet spot where we can actually do this work. And just to bring in Shantideva a little bit, who will be studying all month, one of the things he teaches is that, we rouse this intention, this bodhicitta, this intention to serve, this intention to serve beings, but it's not enough. We actually have to do the work to remain undefended, to remain open, to bear witness. And this is catching stones. So I really, really hope that you can take this story to heart. And since we're talking about bodhisattva vows, I'd like to end by reading Shantideva's great vow that he rouses and shares in the way of the bodhisattva. And it's this: may I be a guard for those who need protection, a guide for those on the path, a boat, a raft, a bridge for those who wish to cross the flood. May I be a lamp in the darkness, a resting place for the weary, a healing medicine for all who are sick, a vase of plenty, a tree of miracles, and for the boundless multitudes of living beings, may I bring sustenance and awakening, enduring like the earth and sky, until all beings are freed from sorrow and all are awakened. Thank you.
Creations are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless, I vow to receive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless, I vow to receive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless, I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it.